Welcome to this week's Haftarah discussion on the Haftarah for Chaye Sarah. This week's Haftarah comes from the very beginning of Sefer Malachim, which we talked very briefly about last week. It's the fourth book of the Navi, and it is split within the Tanakh into Malachim Aleph and Malachim Bet, but it's believed to be one long book of its own. And it records an enormous amount of history, about 400 years of the different kings. It includes more than one prophet, Eliyahu and Elisha being the two primary ones. And last week's Haftarah featured Elisha very prominently. The book starts, as we'll see, at the very end of King David's reign, David HaMelech's reign. And I was just opening my document to remind myself who we say wrote the book of Malachim. Hold on one second. I apologize for not having it up right away. We say that it was written by the Navi Yirmiyahu. And it details many of the kings. And this opening Haftarah actually talks a lot about sort of the drama of kingship, the succession plans of the different kings. And the connection to this week's Parsha is that it opens with David HaMelech getting older, just as this week's Parsha opens with Avraham Avinu getting older. And I will admit that, go ahead. I will admit that my first thought when I read this week's Haftarah was that I didn't really think of Avraham and David HaMelech as like analogous at all. Right? David was like a great king, right? And Avraham was a great leader, but I didn't really think of Avraham in that same sort of kingly way as I thought about David HaMelech. Right, we even call him David HaMelech, Avraham Avinu, sort of like different titles, different vibes. But that is certainly the connection between the two. Here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen just to the Sefaria. There's no actual source sheet here.
There's another connection.
Oh, please.
They both are guests in the sukkah.
That is a nice one.
Yeah,
that's right. Two of our Ushpizin. Yes, certainly. And, maybe I think we could even say some maybe similar characteristics or positive midot, right? But I don't know. I just felt like their energy was sort of different. That was like an interesting connection for me. Between the Parsha and the Haftarah. And so I read through it, but I didn't get very far because I think there's a fascinating character here. Right, so it tells us the Hamelech David Zakein Baba Yamim, he's older, advanced in his years, which is very similar language to that of what you'll see with Avraham in the Parsha. But here, V'yachasuhu b'begadim v'lo yichamlo. Even though they covered him with lots of clothes or bedclothes, he never felt warm. In his old age, he got cold. V'yomru lo abadav v'yavakshu la'adoni hamelech na'ara betula. His courtiers, his helpers, said to him, "Let a young virgin be sought for the king." And here, what's interesting, and this could have been a shir in and of itself, is that there's a connection in language to Esther. If we looked at Megillat Esther, this language of Na'ara Betula, the Avdei HaMelech looking for a Na'ara Betula for the Melech for some reason, V'amda lifnei HaMelech v'tihilo sokenet, and to wait upon your majesty and to be his attendant. V'shachva b'chekecha v'cham l'adoni HaMelech. She has a very, very weird job. Let her lie in your bosom, and my lord the king will be warm. She's meant to warm the king's bed for him in some way. Right, I was reading somewhere, one weird commentary said, right, when you put bedclothes on a cold person, you basically keep more cold from reaching him, but it doesn't necessarily really warm the person, right? You might, like, if you have cold feet when you get into bed, it's hard to get warm. And so the body temperature of another person would warm up the bed. So they looked for a beautiful young woman throughout the territory of Israel, again, sort of similar to the Esther language. V'imtzu et Abishag Hashunamit. And they find this young woman named Abishag, v'yaviu ota lamelech. And they bring her to the king. V'hanara yafa ad ma'od. She was exceedingly beautiful. V'tihila melech sokenet, and she becomes this sochenet, this attendant for the king. V'tishretehu v'hamelech lo yada. She waited upon him, but the king was not intimate with her for whatever reason. And this is, I think, the most bizarre opening for the Haftarah, for the book of Malachim at all. We'll see that Avishag does sort of play a role in the part of the battle for who will be king next. But I got distracted here. Rashi connects her to the Shunammite from our last week's parsha, right? There was an Isha HaShunamit, is the one who makes that private room for Elisha, and it is her son who ends up dying, and Elisha revives him at the end of last week's Haftarah, and perhaps this is the younger sister or some relation to her. But I remembered her because Judith, Judith, whose last name is now escaping me from Shul, Cantor, no, that's because I'm staring at your name. I'll think of her last name, had sent me this.
I think I know which one you're talking about.
Thank you.
I think I know which Judith you mean, yeah.
I thought she might even have been here tonight. When we were talking about one of my favorite characters from Tanakh, oh my goodness, and now her name is escaping me. Serach bat Asher. I don't know if we talked about this in a parsha class that both of you were at, but Serach bat Asher is one of Asher, the 12 tribes, Asher's daughters. She's one of the only women mentioned in the census of the 70 souls who go down to Egypt. And there's a midrash, a beautiful midrash about her. I think we did look at her in a parsha class about how Serach was chosen to be the person to tell Yaakov that Yosef was still alive, right? So Yosef is sold into slavery by his brothers. His brothers tell Yaakov that he has died, right? They show him the bloody clothes. And then when lo and behold, he's alive, they have to tell Yaakov that they're going down to Egypt to see Yosef, and they're worried that this happy shock will kill him. And so the Midrash tells us that Serach, the reason she sort of is merited to have been named at all, is that she was a very good harp player. And she was like sent to slowly, softly play the harp for her grandfather Yaakov and sing this like little tune about how, like, Yosef bani or banich od chai, that your son is still alive, and that would like sort of softly let it enter his consciousness, and he wouldn't die of the shock of this finding out. And when I taught that parsha class, Judith sent me this beautiful, what I might call like a modern midrash about Serach, but really it's about Abishag, which made me very, very excited. And so I wanted to read through part of it. It's by Rabbi Jill Hammer, so certainly not one of our more traditional sources. And she weaves in some shot and some drash in her own sort of imagination. So I thought we'd read like a piece of it and reflect a little bit about it. As you can see, there's not a lot about Avishag as like sort of this introductory piece. We just know that she becomes the bed warmer of the king, and that then later David's sons sort of fight over who gets the right to marry her when the time comes, and that somehow is seen as like a power move to be able to marry the bed warmer of the former king as you're fighting to be the king. So based on these 4 psukim, which she brings up here at the top, she writes this story. So I thought we would read a little bit of it and see what we think. There was a silence in the bedchamber, in the round chamber, a wrong silence. It pervaded the dry air and clung to the bed curtains. It swept over the open books on the cedar table and strummed on the strings of the harp that stood at the head of the bed. Avishag stood in the half-circular doorway and peered into the darkness where there should have been a lit candle. Her hands were braced against the doorpost as if she were tensed for some great gust of wind. Opposite her, 3 stars were framed in the arch window. The Sabbath had ended. King David needed her on the Sabbath as on every other day. He was old, lean, and chilled. Even when he was covered in blankets, only the warmth of her body kept him from shivering. That morning, as they awoke from the bed they shared, he had clung to her as if to a mother. He was too weak to do with her what he had done with so many women, yet she felt tender toward him, as toward a beloved who had gone away years ago. She stayed with him and saw that he ate, not taking the repose to which she was entitled on the Sabbath. When a few ministers came to see him, she had shooed them off. She reminded them that in the afternoon, David studied the sacred writings and could not be disturbed. The king himself had seemed content to read and pray in the peaceful quiet of his chamber. Abishag had napped for 3 hours in the large room David had insisted she have. She used it rarely except to bathe or to practice on her own small harp. The angel of death had visited while she was gone. So there's this like beautiful intimacy that I think Rabbi Hammer is able to draw out of the text about the relationship, right? What does it mean that David was lo yada, that he didn't use her the way he had used so many other women? And what did Abishag feel about this role, right? Unlike in Megillat Esther, where we get to know more about the inner mind of the woman in question, with Abishag, we really don't know how she felt. And so she might have felt disgusted and offended, or she might have felt really honored, or she might have felt jealous. The Mishnah, the Gemara in Sanhedrin assumes that she demanded that David marry her. And David HaMelech said, I can only marry up to 18 wives, and I have 18. Like, so sorry, my playing card is full, and so you cannot marry me. But here it seems like she is content in her role in this sort of loving and intimate, but not sexual or romantic relationship instead. And Rabbi Hammer is playing on the midrash that David HaMelech died on Shabbat afternoon, certainly a well-known midrash. And now she has found him dead at his table where he was studying. So I don't know, I'm curious to hear your reactions, but to me this is a beautiful interpretation, sort of finding something in the absence of detail.
Well, I read the Haftarah and I read the commentary underneath, and it said that David was being honorable towards her by having her be his bedroom, but not using her sexually.
Yes, I think, right, that's like another, like he was treating her like avuncularly, right? Like he understood that he was old and that wasn't like appropriate. Maybe he wanted her to be able to have another life with another partner after, and if he had taken her in that way, maybe that wouldn't have been appropriate. Yeah, that I think that to me, I sort of felt that in this text also, that there was like a mutual understanding of respect, perhaps. And she Rabbi Hammer mentions, so maybe Sherry, this will sound familiar, right? She mentions the end of the Haftarah here, right? She says, many men had perished in the struggle to succeed David. Many had waited for this day, mouthing, "O king, live forever," right? Which is what Bathsheba and the surrounding people sort of say at the end of this week's Haftarah with David. Many had dreaded it, and now it finally came. Avishag knew she must tell someone. She wanted to wait just a little longer, just a few more minutes before the world changed, right? That we know that there is going to be this huge change. There's going to be a huge jockeying for power, and that the world will just be changed, right? This place was David's, not hers. Solomon would insist that she remain part of the household, which indeed does turn out to be true, because I think Adoniah, one of the other sons of David, wants Abishag for himself, and Shlomo sees that as a power play and says no. And so she remains as a relic of David's reign, not as a companion of the king, right? So that's sort of the end of the reflection as it is on this week's Haftarah. But she connects it to this beautiful midrash about how David HaMelech's harp, right, because he was known as a great harpist, that his harp belonged to Serach bat Asher, that it was the same harp. Serach is one of those characters within Tanakh who we say might never have died, because she sort of pops up in all these funny places. She pops up both on the way down to Egypt and then on the census on the way out of Egypt, which would make her very, very old. She's sometimes known as like the memory keeper. The Midrash imagines that she, when Moshe comes and says this like passphrase to the people to show that God had sent him, the Midrash says, how did they know what the phrase was? You know, the key, and it's that Serach told him. And some people say that Moshe told Serach where to find the bones of Yosef, that we had promised Yosef that he would be taken out of Egypt when we left Egypt, and that no one had remembered, but Serach had been alive this whole time and she remembered. And so one of the things was her harp, was that she brought her harp with her down to Egypt and then perhaps out of Egypt. And so here it says, right, she was roused. So Avishag in this midrash falls asleep. She was roused by the sound of harp strings. David's harp strings. David's harp was a 9-stringed wonder. Not only was it the voice of heaven in David's hands, but when he slept, the harp hanging at the head of his bed would sound the notes of the wind. Drawing on another midrash. It awakened him each midnight to make more songs for God. The winds must be mourning now, picking out tender chords in the darkness. Avishag raised her head to watch the invisible plucking. To her astonishment, she could make out a silhouette near the harp. A candle flared. As Avishag struggled to adjust her eyes, she saw that a woman dressed in a colorful patchwork gown stood by the king's harp, strumming it with a sensual hand. And so Avishag, of course, imagines that it's some other person trying to come take David HaMelech's harp. And she tells her to go away, right? And this woman, the red-haired woman, calmly replies, "This is my harp. I gave it to David, and now it must return to me." The king had never told Avishag where his wonderful harp came from. Avishag could not prove the woman was lying, but there was no doubt she must be. How had she known of David's death? Perhaps she was an assassin. The woman's bearing was strange. She held herself with the assurance of a sage, but moved as lightly and flamboyantly as a traveling songster. Avishag was almost sure she had never seen this particular face in the palace before. Right, and so Avishag asks for a proof that it is hers. And this woman, she somehow, when she plays the harp, 3 gold forms embedded in the base of the harp emerged as the 2 halves spread apart. The woman took them into her hand, and they were the letters Shin, Resh, Chet, to spell Serach. The woman showed Avishag the letters, then replaced them in their niches. The harp swung shut so silently and completely that Avishag could barely remember what it had looked like when it was open. The woman regarded her calmly. "I am Serach, daughter of Asher," she said. "This is my harp." So already, I think what Rabbi Hammer is doing is beautiful, because she's taking 2 very well-established midrashes and sort of mashing them together at this point of loss. Right? Serach is a well-established piece of the midrashic tradition, that she had a harp and that she played it beautifully, even in like a life-saving way for her grandfather Yaakov. And Avishag, who lived in the room that contained the harp that David HaMelech played. And then what I love even more is that Avishag knows who Serach is, right? "Oh," Avishag said in a breath, she knew legends of Serach, Jacob's granddaughter. Serach had lived hundreds and hundreds of years as a reward for her harp playing. There were elders from the city of Avel who claimed to have seen her, which is definitely where they say, where the Midrash says Serach ends up dying. Mothers from camps in the wilderness who claimed to have been delivered by the hands of Asher's daughter. "Is it true that you played for Jacob?" Avishag asked. Serach smiled as if Avishag were a child who had asked for the same story a dozen times before. "It is true," she said. "When my brothers returned from Egypt," right, she tells the story of how she had learned to play from her grandmother Zilpah and from her own mother Yonah. There's this really weird midrash that perhaps Asher had married someone who already had a daughter, that like Serach had a magic that came from outside of the Jewish lineage, perhaps. And so her mother Yonah was she was just Asher's stepdaughter, basically. And she carried all of these things in her heart, and her brothers saw that. And so, right, just what I had said before, that she wouldn't die. Avishag listened with rapt attention, and she asks for the song that Sarah had sung. And so she sings her this song about how Yosef rules in Mitzrayim. Again, these words are like pretty much taken from the Midrash of Breshit Rabbah, like a well-established Midrash. And it makes Avishag cry, right? There's this deep connection. And Avishag asks, is it true that Yaakov blessed you with centuries of life? Sarah suddenly seemed subdued. I did not know then what that blessing would mean, right? We think that longevity is a blessing, right? And here I think there is like a subtle play back to this idea of David growing older and to Abraham growing older, right? That we think that we're sad. How could Abraham have been blessed with everything? What does it mean for David to have to be so old? He needs like a young bed warmer to keep him sort of alive and warm. Wouldn't it be great if they could live forever? And this story is sort of reminding us, no, actually living forever is not all it's cracked up to be. Right, Sarah records that she saw Yosef's funeral and his sons as well, right? She saw the beginning, then she was a slave, then she was redeemed. She pointed out the bones of Yosef for Moshe, right? Again, straight from Shemot Rabbah, to carry him to the wilderness. For my family had promised Yosef we would not let him lie in Egypt for eternity. How strange, Avishag said, to do such sad work on a night of joy. It was strange, but no stranger than tonight, playing the harp above the body of the king. Avishag clapped a hand to her mouth and cried for David. Sarah touched her face. The night we dug for Yosef, Moshe asked me to play the harp for him to give honor to our task. I could not find this in the Midrash. Sarah moved her fingers, wailing chords filled the air, right? And she sings another song, one that she soothed Moshe with, this promise of a future for the Jewish people. Sarah wove her chords in and out of Avishag's voice. The duet swelled and filled the night. Avishag thought that David himself would have been pleased. Avishag felt a chill creeping over her. Soon Sarah would leave for hidden places and the king's harp would be no more. She lapsed into stillness, clasping her knees to her chest. Avishag, you have heard more than most living have heard. I have not played these songs in generations. I have been glad for these moments with you, but it is now time for me to take my harp from the world. Right, so this idea that David's harp might like sort of be there when Mashiach comes or when the third Beit HaMikdash comes, it's gone, right? We lost it, sort of. And so this idea that Sarah came to take it, I think, is quite powerful. Wait, cried Avishag urgently, at least tell me what will become of it. I will open it and empty its melody, Sarah explained. You see, one of the gifts my grandfather gave me was the secret of how to climb the ladder to heaven, which I believe is a reference, right, to Yaakov's dream of the ladder, the sulam, with the angels going up and down. I will weave David's prayers into a crown for God. Right, and thinking about the Tehillim as a crown for God, what a beautiful idea. Is that why you gave David the harp? Avishag asked. I met David through his mother, who was a midwife. He was the youngest of the family, but he had a voice that sounded like paradise. When I heard him singing in the hills of Beit Lechem, I knew he would be a great psalmist. I gave him the harp as a coming-of-age present. Imagine my surprise when Shmuel anointed him king, which I think is just, again, such like a beautiful playing off of the Nevi'im, because, right, this is imagining that Sarah sort of saw David HaMelech's potential before Shmuel even did, and that Shmuel then sort of confirmed what she already had thought. God had so many plans for him, Avishag mused, but I loved his music best. And Sarah sighs, Avishag, you are stalling. You need to face the fact that the world is different now. David is no longer in it. There is no one now who can play the harp the way he did. Right, and this Haftarah is actually not the Haftarah of David's death. It's not that the longing and sadness, but I think the way that this story weaves it in, it is actually sort of true to the text of this week's Parsha. Right, this week's Parsha opens with the great sadness of Abraham realizing that the world is different now. And he is the first one to publicly mourn and eulogize another dead person who had been living. So to eulogize his wife Sarah, right? And then for Abraham to die and for Yishmael and Yitzchak to come together and bury him. I think, to me, there felt like if this were a part of the Haftarah, it would fit quite well with the themes of our Torah reading. And also just a time of feeling those losses of the world being different, music sounding different. And Avishag then takes a deep breath, right? We're almost at the end of the story, but here is a twist. And she says, I can, meaning I can play the harp the way David did. The ancient woman in the patchwork gown regarded her coolly. You? When David became ill, Avishag said steadily there was little for him to do. Shlomo had taken over the governing of Israel, but David's music was still like the light of morning. So he taught me to play the harp. He taught me everything he knew. I do not want to waste the gift he had. And Sherry, as you said, the way the commentators think about this sort of respect for Avishag felt very much in line for me with that David would treat her as like a young pupil, as a young student, right? Not as a sexual being. And that he would want to teach her something. It felt very beautiful to me. Sarah shook her head. David, saying of God, of wars, of repentance, joy, and despair, you are a maidservant, a child. Of what would you sing? I would sing of David, Abishag whispered, and a single tear coursed down her cheek. I would sing what might have been between us had he still been a young shepherd. In my eyes, he would have been a king, even if he had herded sheep his whole life. I want to sing of him. Please let me try. I swear that I will keep your harp safe as long as I live. And I felt that was such a beautiful idea of like a sort of a love that might have been, had it been at a different time. Because I think that David actually missed that boat in a lot of ways, right? There's like a lot of drama with Michal. Then there's the whole story of sort of stealing Bathsheba. He has many wives, none who really deserve like a place in history. And to think that there was someone with whom he could have imagined that life, to me almost felt like a serious introspection at the end of his life, and that maybe Avishag is voicing. David has more airs than Shlomo, Sarah said. She smiled an ancient smile. You and I have made music together, and I have not shared my music in over a century. I am in your debt. I will leave the harp with you. See that you use it well. Sarah lifted the harp with a nostalgic reluctance and placed it in Avishag's soft hands. Avishag cradled it as though it were a child, right? A child that we must imagine Avishag may never have, even because she does remain in the court. A dry breeze rifled through her blue-black hair. There was silence. But someone will take it from me, Avishag gasped suddenly. She still lived in the royal court, and there were many poets in Israel. No, Sarah said, I will see to it. No one will ask about the harp. They will forget it exists. It is yours now. Sarah sighed with relief. She sat down on the purple coverlet of David's bed. Then tremulously her fingers touched the nearly invisible strings. A slow, luxuriant melody rose from her lips. And she writes her own song, right? A beautiful song of our imagination. And Sarah takes leave as she watches David, as she watches Avishag play. And she looks back at the woman bent over the gilded harp. "O king, live forever," she whispered. Then the rungs of a ladder appeared at her feet, and she climbed into the sky. So again, I know it's not a traditional midrash, but to me, it was such it was that message of hope and comfort that I had come to really love about the Haftarah from Yeshayahu. And this Haftarah is just filled with the sort of infighting of monarchs, which was not felt too real, I guess, to me. And so I wanted to take us into this beautiful world of comfort, of love, of music, and to also remember that sort of the people who have like an unsung, maybe a literal play on words, an intentional play on words, history actually make a huge difference in the course of our own history. And so it just feels to me like at this moment, there are so many Avishags out there doing important things, but who we don't ever hear their inner monologues. And to know that there's this thread of tradition that runs through them, to me, was very comforting. But I would love to hear what other people think as well.
Wow, that's a so rich, so multi-layered story with so many things. I think it goes centuries and centuries of a string that weaves through generations and generations, that, to use the words of the story. And it reminds me of several things. I was thinking, this feels like a mystical, Kabbalistic story coming from a Hasidic origin, like stories, the Baal Shem Tov. He goes to heavens, comes back, and all this. There's no limit. Everything is intertwined and mixed. Some parts reminds me of the Song of Songs, Shir HaShirim, when the language, the love, the bringing the music into the picture.
I love that.
And Sarah, sometimes in the beginning, she felt like this mysterious, extra-natural, supernatural, an angel, maybe a demon. I thought, well, maybe she's a demon, a little that. But she also said angelic features. So all these things, and I don't know. That could be and I don't want to be sexist or anything like that, but there could be a metaphor for the mystique that people have towards women. Women can, as you grow up, as you become a lover, a mistress, a wife, a child, a mother, a granddaughter. So all this was contained there. So I don't think I can't come up with one single interpretation that puts everything together. But all those things, it's an amazing story. I caught the name Jill, the author of the story.
Her name is Jill Hammer. And the book, here, let me see if I can put the link to the book.
Sisters at Sinai? Sisters
at Sinai. It's a compilation of 20, or an anthology of 24 stories about different women in the Torah. And it draws on the Midrash, but of course, there's a lot more, I think, to it. And as I'm pulling it up, it looks like, as you were saying about, right, like Lilith, right? Is she a demon? Is she an angel? Miriam, Sarah, there's lots of different, I think maybe Lot's wife is one of them as well. But so 24 different stories about different women within Tanakh, right? So this is Avishag and Sarah, I guess. And it's I don't have the book. This is Judith had sent me this this PDF of the story.
It was Judith Karp?
Karp, yes, thank you. That's what I was saying.
Yeah, it sounds like something Judith would come up with.
Yes. You know, and I think that everything you're saying is what I love about Midrash in general, which is why I think like Rabbi Hammer really hit like the Midrash note for me, is that she leaves it very open, right? There are so many different things to think about, so many different, I love that Shir HaShirim, hint that you mentioned is beautiful. So many different interpretations.
It's like a dream without end, a long, long dream.
Yeah. And as we open the book of Malachim, that's like an interesting thread to pull through the beginning of the Sefer, right? Because every book we get into the prophets, we get farther and farther away from our biblical cast of characters. Right? When we start with Yehoshua, we've already left Moshe behind, right? Sort of the last of our people. But I feel like just with each story, again, we get further and further. And so to start Malachim, which is going to go 400 years, by at least invoking Serach, is definitely like a callback all the way to Breshit, which is beautiful. As sort of being present in the chambers of David HaMelech.
Yeah.
Powerful.
I tried 2 or 3 times in my life. I tried to read Freud's The Interpretation of Dreams, and it's a very hard book to read. But when I thought that there is a movie, a play, now made into a movie called Freud's Last Session. Somebody imagined Freud dying of cancer in London, the Nazis bombing London, and C.S. Lewis comes to visit Freud.
That's
both
cool.
they have this big discussion between God, religion, psyche, psychoanalysis,
Hmm.
and I thought that this could be, if I could imagine a book called Freud's Last Dream.
Hmm.
This is all the oneiric, those components of a dream, like the things that don't make any sense, that they're trans-real, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And so somebody, a job for somebody was, your turn, Yael.
But it's a great idea. And it's very dreamlike. And I think there's something powerful about in the king's chambers, two powerful women, one who seemed more powerful than the other, getting to have this sort of dreamlike conversation together, right? Literally over the body of the king almost, right? Something very powerful about it. Yeah. And the role that these women play in keeping those memories alive.
Don't delete it.
Don't what?
Don't delete
Oh,
it.
thank you. Oh, I should stop the recording now. Gosh, I don't remember how to do that. I will leave it for other people.